So David Eby just stood up and basically said, yeah, BC's gonna be really important in this whole new world order thing, like he's auditioning for a role in a geopolitical thriller. And honestly, I'm not even sure if we're doing politics anymore or if this is just the setup for the most ambitious crossover episode in Canadian history. Mark Carney goes to Davos, tells the World Economic Forum that the global order isn't transitioning, it's rupturing, because apparently we're using earthquake terminology for international relations now, and then Premier Eby watches from Victoria going, yes, we're totally ready for this, BC's got this. Meanwhile, the rest of us are just trying to figure out when Canadian politics became a season of House of Cards except with more politeness and significantly better healthcare. Welcome back to Canadian Insights, where today we're unpacking Carney's dramatic Davos speech, why Eby thinks British Columbia is about to become Canada's main character in the new global order, and what any of this actually means for regular Canadians who are just trying to afford rent and groceries. Buckle up, because we're about to go from provincial politics to international power dynamics faster than you can say rules-based order. Let's start with what actually happened in Davos, because Mark Carney didn't just give a normal Canada's doing fine, invest here please speech. No, he went full geopolitical prophet and declared that we're living through a rupture in the world order. Not a shift. Not an evolution. A rupture. That's the kind of language you use when tectonic plates are moving or when your favorite TV show kills off a main character. It's dramatic. It's definitive. And according to Carney, it's exactly what's happening to the international system that's governed global relations since World War II. The rules-based order, the one built on institutions like the UN and NATO and international trade agreements, is fading. And in its place? Well, Carney described it as an era where the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must, which is a quote that's been floating around political philosophy for literally thousands of years and has never, ever been a good sign. But here's where Carney's speech gets interesting instead of just depressing. He didn't stop at everything's falling apart, good luck everyone. He pivoted to saying that middle powers like Canada have the capacity to build a new order. Not wait for someone else to build it. Not hope the big players figure it out. Actually take initiative and create something new that embodies values like human rights, sustainable development, solidarity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. It's an ambitious vision that basically positions Canada as a bridge builder and norm setter in a world where the traditional superpowers are either retreating into nationalism or too busy competing with each other to maintain global stability. And Carney backed this up with actual policy, announcing that Canada's fast-tracking $1 trillion in investment. That's trillion with a T. In energy, AI, and critical minerals. The goal is to diversify trade relationships so Canada isn't overly dependent on any single partner. And let's be honest, he's talking about reducing dependence on the United States without actually saying it out loud, because that would be diplomatically awkward. But the message is clear. Canada needs to build economic relationships with multiple partners across the globe so that if one relationship goes south, literally or figuratively, the entire economy doesn't collapse. Now, enter David Eby, stage left from Victoria. The BC Premier watched Carney's speech and had what he described as feelings of relief and pride. Relief because Carney's saying what needs to be said. Pride because Eby believes British Columbia is going to play a key role in whatever Carney's charting out. And honestly, Eby's not wrong to think BC matters here. British Columbia is Canada's Pacific gateway. It's got ports that connect to Asia. It's got natural resources, tech industries, and geographic positioning that makes it incredibly relevant if Canada's trying to diversify trade and build relationships across the Pacific. If you're pivoting away from overdependence on the US and looking toward Asia, Europe, and other markets, BC is literally your front door. But let's talk about what Eby actually said because the phrasing is fascinating. He said he listened to Carney's speech with relief because the Prime Minister is saying what we need to say and charting a course we have to chart. That's not just agreement. That's validation. That's a provincial premier essentially saying thank God someone at the federal level gets it. And in the context of federal-provincial relations in Canada, which are often characterized by provinces complaining that Ottawa doesn't understand their needs, this is notable. Eby's not fighting with Carney. He's enthusiastically endorsing the vision and volunteering BC to be central to executing it. Eby also acknowledged that Carney's speech will have consequences for Canada's relationship with the United States, which is the understatement of the century. Because here's the thing. When your Prime Minister stands up at an international forum and essentially announces that Canada's building a new global order with middle powers because the traditional order is crumbling, that's heard in Washington. That's noticed. And given that we're dealing with a US administration under Trump that's already shown itself to be unpredictable and transactional, Carney's speech is either incredibly brave or incredibly risky, depending on your perspective. Maybe both. The whole middle power framing is doing a lot of work here. Canada's not a superpower. We don't have the military might of the US or China. We don't have the population of India. We're not an economic giant like Germany or Japan. But we're also not small or insignificant. We're a G7 nation with a strong economy, stable democracy, abundant natural resources, and a reputation for multilateralism and diplomacy. That makes us a middle power, and historically, middle powers have played crucial roles in building international institutions and norms. Canada was instrumental in creating the UN, NATO, peacekeeping operations, and various international agreements. Carney's basically saying it's time to do that again, but for a new era with new challenges. The values Carney listed, human rights, sustainable development, solidarity, sovereignty, territorial integrity, are not randomly chosen. They are a direct counter to the emerging order characterized by authoritarian governments, disregard for international law, climate denialism, and might makes right power politics. Carney's essentially drawing a line and saying Canada stands for something different. We're positioning ourselves as an alternative to both American isolationism and Chinese authoritarianism. We're offering a third way built on democratic values and multilateral cooperation. It's aspirational and idealistic, but it's also smart positioning if you're trying to attract like-minded countries into partnerships. And this is where BC becomes critically important to the whole vision. If Canada's diversifying trade and building relationships across the Pacific, you need infrastructure, ports, supply chains, and economic connections that run through British Columbia. Vancouver's port is already one of the largest in North America. BC's got liquefied natural gas projects that could supply Asian markets. The tech sector in Vancouver is growing. Critical minerals mining in northern BC could feed global supply chains for batteries and electronics. Eby sees all this and realizes that if Carney's vision succeeds, BC goes from being Canada's western province to being a critical node in a new global economic network. But let's pump the brakes for a second and acknowledge the elephant in the room. This is incredibly ambitious and faces massive challenges. Building a new global order isn't something you just do with a speech and $1 trillion investment plan. It requires buy-in from other countries. It requires navigating complex international politics. It requires managing relationships with countries that might not share all of Canada's values but are necessary partners. And it requires doing all this while not completely alienating the United States, which is still Canada's largest trading partner and security ally regardless of who's president or how chaotic the relationship gets. Eby's acknowledgement that Carney's speech will have consequences for US-Canada relations is basically a polite way of saying, this might piss off Washington and we need to be prepared for that. Because if you're the United States and you hear Canada talking about building new global orders and diversifying away from dependence on American markets, you're probably not thrilled. You might see it as disloyalty. You might respond with economic pressure. You might use it as justification for tariffs or other punitive measures. The Trump administration has already shown willingness to use trade as a weapon against allies, and Carney's speech gives them a new reason to target Canada if they're looking for one. But here's the counter-argument: what choice does Canada have? If the rules-based international order really is collapsing, if the US really is retreating into unpredictable nationalism, if global power dynamics really are shifting in ways that leave middle powers vulnerable, then doing nothing is also risky. Building new partnerships, diversifying trade, investing in strategic industries, and positioning Canada as a leader among like-minded countries might be the only smart play available. It's proactive rather than reactive. It's trying to shape the future rather than just responding to whatever happens. The $1 trillion in fast-tracked investment is interesting because that's real money going into real sectors. Energy means renewables, possibly nuclear, maybe LNG for export. AI means tech infrastructure, research facilities, talent development. Critical minerals means mining operations for lithium, cobalt, rare earths, all the stuff you need for batteries and electronics and modern technology. These aren't random choices. These are strategic investments in sectors that are going to define the 21st century economy. If Canada can become a reliable supplier of critical minerals to democratic allies who don't want to depend on China, that's geopolitical leverage. If Canada can be a leader in AI development with strong ethical frameworks, that's soft power. If Canada can provide clean energy to partners, that's both economic opportunity and climate leadership. Eby's positioning of BC as central to this isn't just provincial pride. It's based on actual geographic and economic reality. If you're shipping critical minerals to Asia, they're leaving through BC ports. If you're building AI companies that want access to Pacific markets, they're probably setting up in Vancouver. If you're developing clean energy projects for export, BC's hydropower and potential LNG become relevant. Eby sees an opportunity to make BC indispensable to Canada's national strategy, which means more investment, more jobs, more federal attention, and more provincial influence. But there's also a domestic political dimension to this that's worth noting. Eby's been dealing with affordability crises, housing shortages, healthcare pressures, all the normal provincial governance challenges. By aligning BC with Carney's grand vision of global repositioning, Eby gets to talk about something bigger and more inspiring than the daily grind of provincial administration. It's aspirational politics. It's giving people a sense that BC is part of something important and historic rather than just struggling with the same problems as everywhere else. That's politically useful, especially if you can deliver actual economic benefits from all this international positioning. The reference to finding like-minded countries is crucial because it acknowledges that Canada can't do this alone. Middle power leadership requires coalition building. It requires finding other democracies, other countries that value human rights and international law, and creating networks of cooperation that can counterbalance the chaos of great power rivalry. This is basically the opposite of going it alone. It's intensive diplomacy and partnership building, which Canada's historically been good at but requires sustained effort and political will. Carney's quote about the strong doing what they can and the weak suffering what they must is lifted from the ancient Greek historian Thucydides, specifically the Melian dialogue where Athens tells the island of Melos to surrender or be destroyed. It's not a happy reference. It's about power politics at their most brutal. But Carney's using it to describe the current trajectory and then immediately pivoting to say that's not acceptable and middle powers can build something different. It's a stark framing, accept brutal power politics or work to create an alternative. And Canada's choosing the latter. So where does this leave us? Carney's announced an ambitious vision for Canada's role in a restructured global order. Eby's enthusiastically signed BC up to be central to that vision. There's $1 trillion of investment being fast-tracked into strategic sectors. Trade diversification is the name of the game. And all of this is happening while managing the reality that the US might not love Canada positioning itself as a leader of an alternative bloc. It's high stakes, it's ambitious, and it's either going to position Canada brilliantly for the next few decades or blow up spectacularly in ways we can't predict yet. The fact that a provincial premier is publicly embracing and amplifying a federal vision shows unusual federal-provincial alignment, at least on this issue. Eby's not fighting with Ottawa over this. He's volunteering BC to be part of the solution. That kind of cooperation could actually make a difference if it translates into coordinated policy and investment. Or it could be mostly rhetoric that sounds good but doesn't change much on the ground. Time will tell. What's clear is that Canadian politics is thinking bigger right now than it has in years. We're not just talking about domestic policy tweaks or incremental changes. We're talking about Canada's fundamental role in the world, about building new international architectures, about positioning ourselves for a future that looks very different from the past. Whether it works is anyone's guess, but at least someone's trying to be proactive rather than just reactive. And in politics, that's actually kind of refreshing. If you made it through this entire breakdown of geopolitical strategy and provincial enthusiasm, you clearly care about where Canada's headed on the world stage. Hit that like button if you think Canada trying to lead middle powers and building a new order is either brilliant or absolutely wild, or possibly both. Subscribe to Canadian Insights for daily updates on how this grand vision either materializes or falls apart, because we're covering every development multiple times a day. Drop a comment with whether you think Eby's right about BC's importance or if this is all just aspirational talk that won't change much. And check out our other videos for more on federal-provincial relations, trade policy, and international positioning. Thanks for watching, stay informed, and I'll catch you in the next one.